an experiment with like a type of, not a lecture, but a sort of open forum that we're doing. I'm gonna moderate this, and then on this side we have people who are in support of free will and believe that free will is true, and on this side we have people who are in support of determinism, and we'll just have a discussion. The central question of the open forum today is gonna be, does free will exist? And I think the best place for everyone to start is defining the terms, defining what free will means and defining what determinism means. So I'll let you all guys, I'll let you all start with that now.
You guys want to start? Or you guys want to start?
Okay, so what's the question?
No, it's like how do you define free will?
I guess, yeah, the question would be, what do you believe free will is?
I suppose I would think of free will as like basically coming up with thoughts and like will and making decisions independent of outside influences, where basically like you're able to have your brain come up with a decision. You're able to choose multiple various decisions independent from outside influences or affects.
So,
I would disagree because I think free will takes into account a lot of outside factors. But the point is that we can make a decision from that, right?
So I agree that outside factors influence the decision-making process, but I wouldn't view it necessarily as that means that it's deterministic or that those are the sole influences. I'd also say that free will is like, those can skew how you'd effectively measure something like free will. I mean, you can't really measure it, but I'd say something that's like random-ish, but by the outside influences can skew someone to act in a certain way,
So
in which they believe to be in their best.
You're arguing more like compatibilism then, kind of.
I'm not familiar with that, but
You said you wanted to expand on Sam's definition of free will?
Yeah, I was going to say, based on Sam's definition, I like kind of what Sam is explaining. I think that I would extend that to kind of a more microscopic sense. And you can, I would define free will as you can make decisions completely separate from physical reality, and you can make, you can influence material transformations completely separate from material reality. And so, and this, I think that the idea of free will would essentially defy almost every law of conservation of energy that we have, because that just wouldn't be possible.
So I would disagree that in making decisions directly independent from reality. That's not what I think either of us would argue. I'd say that you can have those decisions that can influence your decision-making process, but in the end the decision is still up to you, in the sense that there's always a chance, like if you were to, or take I mean, one of the things that we'd argue about probably has to do with quantum mechanics and the idea that you can have something that has multiple states, or not multiple states, but different probabilities of being in a certain state. And although some probabilities might be extremely unlikely, those are still feasible. And so I would interpret those uncertainties as the manifestation of consciousness in observable reality, and that even though those probabilities can be skewed, it doesn't mean they're non-zero. And so there's still the choice, even if you're greatly skewed or incentivized, again, to do something else.
That's actually like a really good point, and something I wanted to gear the conversation towards. I was also reading about it, and I think I brought this up in the Spinoza Part 2 lecture, but I was talking about how there are like possibly random fluctuations in quantum mechanics, in quantum fluctuations, and I'm wondering, is there a consensus on that? And if so, does that mean that if there are random fluctuations in quantum mechanics, does that mean that free will does exist, or does it not?
Well, it depends on how you interpret it, but I would say yes.
I think that what you're talking about right there is the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, where it states that you cannot actually, it rejects the idea of counterfactual definiteness, where you can, where the counterfactual definiteness is the idea that you're able to basically speak about the matter and state of some object without actually measuring it. And so what you're saying is that there is, different probabilities of the matters and states, and you're not measuring them, but you can still define them. So.
And once you measure them, then everything changes. And yeah, we can go there too.
I guess a question I would have though is, if we assume that to be true and we assume there to be random fluctuations in the quantum world, how would that apply to humans? You said that you view that randomness as the manifestation of consciousness.
So
can you explain that?
I'd say this question.
I'd argue kind of on the grounds of chaos theory. So if you have a double pendulum and you change the initial conditions slightly, then over time you can get wildly different behavior. And I'd say that the brain, even if you fire one neuron, it can have a whole cascading effect. And so consciousness could be small fluctuations in the brain could cause knock-on effects that could have macroscopic results from small microscopic.
Okay, I have another question about
Yeah.
that, but I'll first go to Sid. Sid had a question.
I was going to ask about for the integrity of the public forum. I think that the moderator should stay moderating instead of
Is it okay if I ask some questions?
Yeah, I think he's doing a pretty good job. I don't know.
All right. Okay.
How so?
I'll take a more laid back approach in a moment, but I had one more question on that. You said that like obviously affects us on a more macroscopic level when you have those random fluctuations. But my question is, even if that randomness does happen, is that our free will? Because we're not actively influencing those random fluctuations.
It's a matter of interpretation. I would say that those fluctuations are the consequence of our influence, of our free will, of the influence of free will on reality. That's what I would say. So it depends on how you interpret it, because you could also interpret it as it's just a mathematical formalism that describes how the universe works. But what I'm actually more arguing upon, I'm not necessarily arguing that you can establish free will. I'm saying that you can't really establish either, and that you need to look for alternative sources. And so that's where
Wait, so
I
basically
believe in.
what you're saying is that the reasons for the quantum fluctuations is because of the influence of our free will?
I'm saying that it's a possibility. Because
So that's what's causing the fluctuations?
yeah, kind of.
But don't we have more actual mathematical reasons for these causing
So,
fluctuations?
well, it depends. If free will, one of the ways that you could measure, say, something like determinism, is that if I keep the state the same and I report and I proceed with the same experiment twice, then I should get the same outcome.
Yeah.
Right? That's one of the ways that you could look at that. And so the opposite of that would supposedly correspond to free will. And what we see there is that if you repeat the same experiment twice, so let's say I have 2 slits like in the double slit experiment, and I fire an electron through them, and I fire another electron through them, that they should end up in the same spot, or they should have roughly the same spots, but that's not what we observe. And so I'd say that if the opposite of being able to reset the conditions and go through the same procedure and getting the same result is free will, that corresponds to something that looks roughly random. Does that make sense?
I think what you're saying, Andrew, is that since there could be a possibility that something is random and is not determined by cause and effect, that would mean that we have to question determinism.
Sort of. I'd say yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then you said we should look to other causes. Do you?
Not necessarily look, but what I mean is that you can't argue for determinism on physical grounds.
So basically you agree that there's no physical argument for free will, so you're basically just saying that there's not an argument for determinism either? Or?
I'd say that it depends on how you interpret the fluctuations.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would have something to say, not based off of what you just said, but based off what you said a few minutes ago, was how you said, we make decisions and these decisions are often random, right? And they do influence future actions. And so those actions, that future is random and unpredictable. So therefore define determinism. But here's the thing is, I think the idea of defining us and defining our brain, where do we draw the line and how do we define us? Because if you think about it, we're all made up of atoms and we're all made up of cells and we're all made up of organs. But how do we say that we are independent of atoms and cells? How do we define our brain and not say, oh, it's just a bunch of neurons and a bunch of cells clumped together? How can we possibly individually make a decision independent of all of those cells?
No, the collective is consciousness.
Okay.
So the sum of all those things would be consciousness.
Okay.
So the collective of people, or would you
the person and the surrounding environment?
So just the individual organism itself and just the surrounding environment?
Yeah.
So basically you would just define, you would agree that there's not really anything more to like you as a person, like you don't agree that there's anything outside of your brain, it's just a combination of the atoms and...
I would say that there is, but that you can't establish it or the alternative on any grounds of pure reason.
Okay.
That makes sense. And then I guess moving
So
past
I would
that,
say there is, but
like
So,
this
wait,
discussion.
to be clear,
oh,
so you're
sorry.
saying there is something besides just your...
that it couldn't be established on the grounds of pure reason. Yeah.
So you believe that there's some sort of external consciousness outside of just your brain? Or?
Yes, but that it wouldn't be establishable.
But like, where would that... Where
Would
that?
it? I don't know.
I believe he's saying that he may believe it, but there's not necessarily like a 100% justification for it.
And
But
that
we
you
can't rule that out. I think that's what he's saying. I think moving past that, beyond like the realm of physicalism, which is where the conversation has been up to this point, do we want to analyze the psychological justifications for determinism maybe? Do any are any people familiar with the Stanford study?
I'm not so familiar with any of the psychological theory, but go ahead. I don't,
Well,
I don't
yeah, I'm familiar with it. The study is basically like, people think of like consciousness, right? About like, oh, like I'm thinking about a decision I'm making. Like basically they're like, oh, do you want to eat an apple or like a pear, right? And you think about it and you're like, oh, which one am I going to eat? You weigh all the things. You're like, oh, which one is telling my life in the past and all that, all your conscious thought, right? Basically the study is that actually your subconscious had already made the decision before your conscious brain starts thinking about it.
How did the study come to that conclusion?
Well, because they actually like monitor like your brain activity. And
This is
like,
the Stanford study by Robert Sapolsky you're talking about?
yeah, and there's also another one actually. There's also another one in the University of New South Wales that also monitored, like it was more like just about like asking people certain choices while they were monitoring their brain activity. And they found that even though they can't actually draw a specific conclusion, they actually found evidence of where the decision would lie even up to like 7 to 11 seconds before.
Oh wow.
But then like that they can be sure within like just like maybe like 300 milliseconds as a Stanford study.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
Yes, there's processing, but at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're providing an input through someone's senses, and then that modifies the states in their brain, and then it sets on a knock-on effect. And I think that this is just another instance in which it's like, if you're making a decision, for example, you might like know what you're going to do, but then take more time to ponder that. It's not necessarily. I'm not sure if that establishes that it's not up to your own choices, because you got.
It just says that like the input happens before you even realize. Like the output has already, outcome is already there before you realize it, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't a
unconscious choice.
An unconscious choice.
But that's still random, which would still.
But it was still a choice that you developed in your brain without actually having.
But you're operating under the assumption that the subconscious isn't a choice that you made.
Yeah, that's yeah.
But alright.
It could be a choice, right?
Well, I just want to bring up one thing because I feel like even if you make a choice, like obviously like even in determinism, we all agree that you still make a choice, right? It's just that the
Wait, what? Then what's your definition of determinism?
Yeah.
No, not that you don't make a choice, but your brain still analyzes all the facts from the causation.
Yeah, but that is set before.
It still draws a conclusion. All that determinism is saying is that the conclusion it's drawn is based on all of the like affects and all of the influences. And that conclusion would be the same no matter what, because it's just the brain analyzing all of the influences, right?
I have a point to make on this, which is that if it's just the sum of lots of influences, then those influences you could assume, like even under the determinist sense, you could assume those would be roughly random, right? Or you wouldn't be able to determine all of them because there's so many, right? And so you could assume that how it would appear in some experiment would be roughly random. But at the same time, that's assuming that all the that it's solely the influences. We agree that there's influences, but we don't agree that it's solely influences. And as I already established, something like free will would already exhibit random-like behavior. And if you have the sums of lots of, like, we know that both, even if free will, if it's a result of what I mean is I'm not sure if you can determine whether it's a result of free will or just the net sum of total influences, because they should roughly appear to be the same, which is random.
But, I'm sorry, Youri.
Oh, I was going to say, based on what you said, where it appears to be random on a macroscopic scale, right?
Yes.
I think that it does appear to be random on a macroscopic scale, but I think that, so there was a very famous thought experiment by Laplace, and it was called the Laplace demon. And it was basically saying that if you had a human, or in this case a demon, that was given the exact position and momentum of every atom, then you could determine the outcome of the future and the past. But the past was later ruled out because of the irreversible law of thermodynamics.
So, but we already talked against this because in quantum mechanics, first off, you can't know the exact position or momentum of every particle, and that's just the uncertainty principle. And yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna pause it right here because the audio. Okay, so we have a few questions from the audience. We only have 3 minutes, so I'd like to get those out real quick, and then maybe we can get some answers to that. I believe Sungwoo, did you have a question?
No, it's Zach. Zach already was.
Oh, Zach.
No, I forgot.
Sid, you had a question?
3 on 2 debate or a 2 on 2?
No,
I think Haya is doing a good job of being a moderator because he acknowledges both.
If there are not any other questions, we'll have closing statements by each side. Do you have a question?
No.
Okay, we're gonna do closing statements then. Joel can do closing statements first, and then it's your turn.
So,
yeah, closing statement. All right.
Wait, what question?
So, I'd like to point out this isn't necessarily the first time that that developments or that our understanding of the physical world has influenced our development of what it means to have free will. In the first or second lecture, I watched them last night, on Spinoza, he mentions that they had this conception of lines and planes, which is a kind of predicting parts of reality. But that's just part of that's because that's how they thought about reality and free will, is they thought it was deterministic, because that's what everything suggested at that point according to physical theories. And so I don't think it's any different to consider lines and planes, or consider like quantum, the implications of quantum mechanics in this argument, as it is to discuss, say, the implications of Casper.
And then we only have 1 minute left, so closing statements for Joel.
So I would just like to ask, like, what is really your basis for, like, actually believing in free will? Because I understand that you can say that there's some sort of external force outside of your brain. I don't really understand exactly how you define that or came to that conclusion, but I don't really understand what the need for free will in this thing, because I feel like all of our decisions that everybody has made could be easily explained by the outside influences, so I don't know why you need to look to some external mystical, like, outside of your brain kind of.
So I'm religious, so that's why, because it's fundamental to my beliefs.
So that is a very, very important principle. But the thing is, a lot of scientists have actually theorized that quantum mechanics is incomplete. Like Einstein himself. Has
but Einstein was also influenced by Spinoza. That's why.
Alright, the conference is over. We might have a part 2 if you want.